Okay, well, it looks like we've started up. We are live on the air. This is actually broadcasting directly from the Bombshell Miniatures studio here in North Texas. So what I'm going to be talking about to you guys today is some of the stuff that we had put together for our Babes3 Kickstarter project. And I'm going to show you some sculpts and some of the things that I've been working on, for that specific project. Let me go ahead and switch us over to the workbench here. And we'll take a look at what's going on there. So these are some of the things that I've got set up. Let me move some of this art out of the way. Yeah, here we go. These guys over here. Okay. So some of the work in progress pieces that I've shown on the Babes3 Kickstarter project are based on artwork by Chris Walton, and we licensed some of those designs from him that he had already created, and they were existing pieces of art that he had done just on his own for kind of unique and different takes on, I guess, fantasy female characters, that you would use in like D&D or Pathfinder or something like that. So he created sort of all of these different archetypes, and so we had found some of those, or I found some of them online and contacted him about licensing those in order to turn them into sculpts and make miniatures and so forth out of them. And so that was part of the main thing that sort of drove us doing, the third Babes Kickstarter project. So this design here is one of them. And let me hold up this little piece of art. I don't know if it'll focus on that. Let me see if it will. There it goes. Yeah. Okay, so one on your right is a dwarf ranger character, and she's got a sidekick that's a lynx. I guess it's like her hunting companion and that kind of thing. So that was one of the characters that we licensed from him, and so I've kind of got that sort of started here, and it's in progress. I don't know if I've got enough light to kind of see that, but there we go. So you can kind of see a little bit of her in progress. I've got the armature basically blocked out at this point. So I had started with a wire skeleton for her and built that up with Abe's epoxy sculpt and Procreate, which is another epoxy putty that's like green stuff, and kind of built that up as a core. And then now I've skinned it at this point. Let's see, it's losing focus. Skinned it at this point with another kind of a putty that's called bees putty, and this comes from a sculptor in Germany, and it's a material that's very similar to Fimo or Super Sculpey or something like that. So it stays pliable and workable until you actually bake it in the oven, and the recommended temperature on that's like 215 degrees Celsius. So it's around I'm sorry, 115 degrees Celsius, 240 degrees Fahrenheit, so it would be pretty close to the equivalent of that. And it bakes for about 30 minutes, and then it hardens up to where it's like this. You can actually handle it and mold it and so forth. This particular sculpt that we have, we're gonna try to feature him as part of an upcoming stretch goal or something like that. This was sculpted by Chad Hoverter, who's a buddy of mine. He's local here, and we had contacted him to sculpt a couple of canines for us, and so this German Shepherd just came in, or Alsatian. I guess he'd kind of be either one. And so we're kind of hoping to be able to offer him as an upcoming stretch goal or whatever. So while I'm talking to you guys about the project, I was going to block out this Lynx companion for our Dwarf Ranger character while we're doing that. So, and if you guys have any questions or comments about, you know, Kickstarter or sculpting, or, you know, pretty much any of the stuff that we're doing as Bombshell Miniatures, you know, we can talk about that too, or pretty much anything else.
I had a question, Patrick. I was looking at some of the stuff you're doing just now, and you're doing, you do that epoxy first, and that cures on its own. And then when you put the base of beeswax, do you then go in and bake it on top of it? And then go back and just do it little by little and just bake each layer in?
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes it works like that. So, for example, like typically a sculpt will start out like this, which is basically just, you know, a wire skeleton, you know, that I'll pose for, you know, whatever the final pose is going to be. And this is basically, it's wire that's twisted together and then bent, you know, into shape to kind of form, you know, a rough human skeleton, as it were. And then I'll take and pose this in whatever the, you know, the action pose may be. And say, for example, it'll be something, you know, that'll wind up like this. Let me see if I can get that in there. So we're going to focus. Hello. Silly camera. I don't know if it's going to do it or not. Let's see. I guess it's not. There it goes. Okay, it's going to snap in. But anyway, so this, for example, this is going to be once the armature has been posed. So then what I'll do is I will take a combination of those two different putties and I mix them half and half. And what I use is mainly for this is Procreate, okay, which is kind of like green stuff. It's a two-part epoxy that you mix together, and then it hardens, you know, just like green stuff does. You know, you have about an hour or so to work with it. But then I also use another putty, which is kind of like Milliput. It cures quite a bit harder. And so by mixing the two putties together, I get kind of the best properties of both on that. So it creates a really rigid surface to sculpt on, and it keeps the wire from basically, you know, flexing too much. I mean, there's still a little bit of play in this, you know, until, you know, the rest of it's worked out. But what that allows me to do is kind of build up some of these understructures where I can kind of bulk the armature out, and it gives it a surface that you can work over, you know, later on. So if I want to sculpt a boot, for example, on this foot or this leg or whatever, and I take a piece of material and put it on there, then this kind of gives it a surface that, like where her foot is, it'll create an understructure for me to sculpt the details of like the folds in the leather and the seam where the sole is and all of that sort of thing, and it doesn't deform as much. It's pretty tricky to take a piece of wire and attach a piece of putty on it and then kind of poke at it. It'll kind of shift one way and shift another way, and you know, you'll wind up chasing it around the wire, you know, if you do that. So creating an understructure like this for the sculpt creates a really rigid foundation in order to kind of do those details and so forth on later on. Plus it kind of takes up, you know, some of the space and bulks it out a little bit. Was that what you were asking?
Yeah, because I took a sculpting class, and I was finding that problem, exactly what you're talking about at the end, where you put green stuff or Sculpey around the wire, and when you start to push and play with it, it starts to, you know, make this hole and push to one side or the other, and so yeah, that's good information.
Let's see if I can get this to focus back on where we are. Say hello. Yeah. It's a tricky camera. Yeah, because and the different thing about the bees putty that I'm using, and let me kind of show the package of that. It usually comes like this, and we sell this in our online web store, or you can get it directly from Stefan. I think his website is studioworks.de, or you could just probably Google bees putty, and then the link or whatever will come up for that. But this material is, like I said, it's a poly clay that's like Fimo or Super Sculpting. Now the thing about that is, if you've worked with Fimo before, you'll notice that like when you try to stick it on something, it won't stick to it because the formulation of it is very dry. In other words, even if you took a piece of baked Sculpey or Fimo and tried to condition some unbaked material and tried to stick it on there, it wouldn't adhere because there's not really anything in it that's gonna that's like a glue kind of a thing. So you kind of have to treat the surface of it with a little bit of Vaseline or a petroleum jelly type of thing to condition the baked Super Sculpey in order to attach unbaked Super Sculpey to it, and it's kind of a tedious process. So, for example, if I was going to block out one of these armatures like this little links that we're working on here, I couldn't take Fimo or Super Sculpey and just take it as it is and directly stick it on there. I would have to coat this with some kind of a glue, like some of the other sculptors that use this process will take and bulk out their armature first, and rather than letting it cure, while the epoxy, like the green stuff or whatever, is still tacky or sticky, then they'll start putting their Fimo and stuff on it. But if you're going to do that, you kind of have to work within that time frame of before it cures, or that stuff isn't going to stick onto it. Okay, so the bees putty, and what's unique about that is that it's formulated to basically stick right onto something, and you can start sculpting on it. So, like if I was going to sculpt a little critter, I could take this block and basically take a piece of, bees putty and stick it on there, and it's stuck. It's like it's not moving off of that. So I could basically start sculpting on it as it was, some kind of little, critter, a rabbit or whatever it's going to be. You can't really do that with any other polymer clay that I've found. So that's really the appeal to me, is that I can work really fast without having to go through all of these extra steps. I mean, even though it kind of seems like it, is that I can take this material and start sticking it right on the armature and sculpting immediately with it.
Yeah, a lot of people seem to like it. It's gotten a lot of great reviews from everybody. A lot of sculptors are turning towards it, and doing great things, it looks like. So that seems one of the reasons why. Yeah,
it's pretty amazing. Sorry.
How does it work with your final mold making? I've heard some reports that it's not as easy, especially for your vulcanizing things for.
Yeah, that's true, and that's pretty much true with pretty much any polymer clay. I mean, Sculpey and Fimo to a certain degree aren't very resilient, or they're not as resilient as green stuff or any of the putties, which is really why they started using that stuff to begin with, was that it kind of cut out that intermediate step, because back in the day, whenever they were sculpting, like historicals would have been done in like a jewelry wax. And then they would have taken and made a lost wax, casting of that in bronze or, another, like a metal kind of a thing. And then they would use that as a master to go and make the Vulcan molds. And that's a very expensive and a, time-consuming process. So back in the Ralpartha days, they were looking for a material that is like, well, we could sculpt the figure directly in this material and then vulcanize it, the original right away. And so that was one of the reasons why the plumber's putty was as popular as it was, is because it could withstand that Vulcan process. Now this type of stuff, it will come apart. If you just put it in, a black rubber mold, it's going to come out. And if you get a good pocket, it's not going to really matter, unless you want to retain the sculpt for, archive purposes, or whatever. But in that regard, it would be better to do a silicon mold, and cast it in RTV. Yeah, and then you do your resin masters and stuff off of that, and then those resin masters will go, to your production molds and so forth. And so that's really the best process to use for, anything that's done with a polyclay type of thing. And that's what we do. I make the resin masters and stuff for these, so that, it preserves the sculpt as much as possible, and then then those resin pieces can be vulcanized. But so I'm just kind of softening this up here, because the softer it is, or you kind of warm it up, just with your hands, and it tends to stick on there a little bit better. So I'll usually cut off a little piece of that and put it right here to work from, so that I can actually get to it, and it keeps it kind of warm and pliable. But anyway, we're talking about vulcanization there a minute ago, and there are new silicon Vulcan molds that are available now. They used to not be, and they cook at a lower temperature, and I think the pressure is still required, in order to pressurize the two halves to make sure that they fill all the little crevices and so forth of the original. But it's a lot less damaging to the original sculpt. So I know that Valiant Miniatures here in the U.S., they cast our metal stuff for us. They use the low temp silicon Vulcan molds now. So, we could, if we wanted to, I could go directly into that, with these sculpts. But I always like to have a safety, because you never know what's going to happen. And having a resin backup of it, or actually, maintaining the original sculpt to where you can make more iterations of it is
I can imagine the scariest thing is sticking things in the post and then waiting to see whether they arrive and what happens to them if they have.
Yes, and that is a very scary thing. And unfortunately, I haven't had anything that's gone missing like that. But I have heard stories and so forth. So the other thing that's kind of tedious is, once you've done a sculpt and you've got it ready, it's finished and approved and ready to send off and all this, is that, sometimes it has to be cut apart for the mold making process, and, separate pieces and that kind of thing. And so, if it's sculpted all as one piece, you have to cut those pieces apart and then key them so they fit back together and all that. And that whole cutting process, I've never really been a big fan of that, because inevitably I will break something and have to go back and touch it up and repair it, beyond just, keying the parts themselves. So.
Hey, Patrick, I got to let you go, dude. I got to get back to work. It was good seeing you.
Well, thanks for popping in, Mark. I appreciate you dropping in.
Yeah, no worries. Nice meeting you, Anthony. Take care, guys.
Cheers.
We'll see ya. I don't know if this has gotten back to focusing yet on. There it goes. That looks like that's a little bit better. So I don't know how well you can see any of that.
I see a fair amount. It sort of wants to focus on the lines on the cutting mat more than anything.
Yeah. Let's see if I can get that up there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So basically, at this point, I'm just taking the conditioned putty, and I'm starting to fill out the bulk of the volume on the legs and so forth on there. So let's go ahead and get her out. We were talking about resin casting there a little bit, and like this particular piece that I've started working on is kind of a conversion piece. I had sculpted this orc female character for our Babes 2 project, and had made an RTV mold of the basic anatomy for her, with the intent of producing a couple of different iterations of it. So this is a resin casting of the orc body, and I've kind of started filling out some of her costuming, so she'll have kind of a build up there where her apron will go, and she's already got boots and stuff on at this point. So, and this is all done with Procreate with the 2-part epoxy stuff. So she's going to be kind of an assistant blacksmith character that will go with our new melee piece that we've offered on the project. I think I'm going to call her the Forge Maiden. And I'm not really sure how interesting this will be. If it'll be like watching paint dry, but it's basically, wash, rinse, and repeat until you kind of build up the forms and the volumes, shapes or whatever that you're looking for the final sculpt. So a lot of the stuff that you're working on really hinges on the pose that you've already, worked out in the armature itself. So if that isn't spot on, if it's not the action that you're wanting to portray, or it's not the right, composition or whatever, the more putty and material and stuff that you stick on it, it's just going to compound the issue. So it really all comes down to if it's a strong pose and a balanced type of composition to what it is that you're sculpting. So on this particular critter, I understand that lynxes have pretty lanky legs. They tend to be long-legged. So I'm going to try to make that evident here in the main the main anatomy of it. I looked up some stuff online. Of course, reference is always really important. So I looked at a lot of pictures of lynxes in different poses and different actions and that kind of thing. In order to kind of fill out what I couldn't see from the design of the art, because the art, reference art, or the concept art rather, for the characters only has the links from one view. And so, a lot of times if you're working from, like a commissioned design, or if it's art, from a company that you're, that's a client, that you're doing work for, they'll send you maybe a character with different angles. It's like, well, here's what they look from the side or from the back, or here's an important piece of equipment that, what their sword looks like by itself, or, that other kind of thing. But with this, since it was an existing piece of art, and fortunately a lynx isn't something that's invented. I mean, there's other reference of it. You can kind of go out online and see, like, okay, well, what does the tail look like, or what does the back legs look like in relation to the pose and everything, and get some different views of it, so that since you're working on three-dimensional art, and you turn it around, it'll look correct, or like it's supposed to, from all the different angles. see if I can get this down in there. So put it on here.
Well, yes, this is the big advantage over green stuff, because it would have started to get to the point that it wouldn't be easy to do anything with by now.
No, it would have been very difficult to work, and that's the key to, like, if you're sculpting stuff in putty. Say for example, like on the orc character, this was pretty much all I got done was just her boots, you know, in that session. So, you know, so this working in putty, it's like you pick out sections to do at a time, and it's like, okay, well now I'm going to do this section, or now I'm going to do that section, and then you work it until, you know, you pretty much can't work it anymore. And that's a real advantage with using a polymer clay in sculpting, is that, you know, it allows me the time to, you know, work on it and, you know, turn it around different angles and see, okay, well, you know, there's not enough muscle here, or there's not enough volume to, you know, this cape, or, you know, whatever, or armor, you know, whatever it is that I'm working on, and to add material to those areas and fill them out, you know, the way that they're supposed to be. So, and that's really helped me leveling up as a sculptor, you know, because I learn a lot. You know, it's like, oh, I had the time to look at it, you know, to kind of step back, and, you know, you can leave it a couple of days, and then come back and, you know, turn it around and look at it again and go, oh yeah, I see that I've, you know, made one leg bigger than another one, and then you can go and, you know, either add to it, you know, if you want them to be both that size, or you can reduce it, you know, by scraping some of it off and then, you know, smoothing it out. So. So it's here. And this is actually one of the most fun parts of the sculpting process for me is the initial stages of, like, you know, blocking the characters and stuff out, and kind of seeing, okay, well, this is how it's going to develop, and this is really kind of where the character starts to take shape. Let's see. And like on a character like this, where the underside is really kind of difficult to get to. So you can see where her abdomen would be, I guess, under here. I'll try to kind of fill out that area first, since I know that's kind of difficult to get into, and make sure that all the material is seated in there. Is it still going out of focus? Yeah. Let's see. Talk to me, Hudson. There we go. You know, come on. There's a little bit. Yeah. Man, as soon as I take my hand away from it, it just totally goes out of focus. But the idea is that, you know, once I can get kind of in these little tough to get areas here and get it all blocked out, that then I can work on the outside of it without having to worry about, oh, I can't get in there and now I've messed up, you know, the section of her arm, or, you know, or something that I've kind of already worked on. So, but even working with a polymer clay, I'll still do it in stages. So, for example, like with the actual dwarf character that I showed earlier, if you can see that, I can't get that to work. So, see, there it goes. Okay. So basically, I've got her rough volume worked out, for her the edge of her coat and where her armor and so forth is going to be. And so what I'll do on that is I'll start, smoothing out the surface of it, and then start working the details into there. Like if there's a quilted texture where it's kind of like a padded coat that she has from the art, then I'll start working those details and so forth in. And this will be pretty much all I do is just that area, her boots and then her basic undercoat and that sort of thing. And then once I get all the details and stuff kind of worked into the surface of that, then I'll go ahead and bake that section of it so that it's kind of, you save your work, so it doesn't crash on you. And that keeps me from, I guess, running the tool or fingernail or whatever into an area that's like, oh, I didn't want to, mess that up, as I'm putting other layers and other stages and stuff over the top of that. So then, because I know, okay, well, at this point, all of this stuff isn't going to change. This is as much of it as I can work, at this point without, damaging any of it. Then I'll bake that. And then once it cools, then you can, kind of come back and then start, another session on it. So, and I kind of break a lot of my sculpts down into sessions of like, it's like, well, there's going to be so much of this that I can do in the first session, and then I'll save that, for a second session. And I'll work maybe an hour and a half per session, or, depending on how long it is, but I try to take, breaks to keep from just, sitting the whole time because I get kind of stiff and, and,
It's always a lot easier to see things after you've had a break anyway, if you're
certainly
looking at details and so on.
Absolutely. Well, do you normally frequent the hobby hangout group, or how did
No, this is the sort of first time I've tried the Google Hangouts, so
Okay.
quite interesting to see.
I didn't know that if you
Well, I've been backing a Kickstarter since the start, certainly.
Right. Well, we certainly do appreciate that, because I can't do any of this stuff really. I mean, if it weren't for backers like you, for sure. So I guess you found the link to the Hangout and stuff on our.
Yeah, I put that on from the Facebook page.
On the Facebook page, okay. So.
And remarkably, it all seemed to work.
Yeah.
Which with these things is never a guarantee.
Right.
Go somewhere new.
Well, that was one of the things that kind of bugged me about the delay of it, getting started, was I had gone to start the Google Hangout section, and where the like the live link or whatever to record it wasn't in there anymore. So then I had to start searching all this stuff, and then it didn't come up until another search that was like, oh, hey, now if you want to do a Google Hangout, you've got to start a live broadcast through YouTube and then do all of this stuff. So that I didn't know any of that because that had changed since the last time.
So Patrick Keith is doing a live.
Yeah, hi. It looks like we've got somebody else that's joined. Is this?
If you wanted to see somebody sculpting in the 28mm scale, the craziness that was.
Wait, it's not. It's my turn. Who's gonna? Who has some brownies? Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Oh, we had a match.
Well, hi, Randy. I just wanted to welcome you to the Hangout, if you can hear me.
I totally forgot what the one I was looking for was. Ooh. Here's a chicken, here's a chicken, is she here? Lift it. Nope. It's Nina's her, right? Yeah. They both stand on her. Oh, man. Nope. No. Okay. Nope. Okay. Yeah, you gotta keep it up here though. I remember if I just looked that over, or that's the same card I. Yes. That's the same two cards. We watched a video in psychology called the Etiquette of the Boys' Bathroom. It's rules that are not said we have to follow.
There's not nowhere near enough people that follow those rules.
Here's some of the rules. Rule 1. If you're in the bathroom and you see a line of stalls, you go to the one on the last.
The farthest apart.
You're in the stall and one person is in there, you go to the other end.
Yeah.
Assuming you're going to follow the rule 1. If you're in the bathroom and you come across a situation with 2 people in the bathroom, you pick the middle one. If you come to the bathroom, there's 3 people in the stalls, and you don't know which one to use, you do not use the urinals. Do not use urinals. Use the stall or get out. And there's rule 2.
Well, I guess that's good advice.
Do not talk to each other.
That's true.
You should tell her about Bob Ortiz.
I know where this one
I don't remember what that was.
About his chips and soda.
Oh yeah, he brought in all like half his lunch in his damn bathroom. Don't do that either. That's gross.
That was cool. And then there's another one. They explain what happens when you break the rule. And pour back.
Right.
So it looks like you use clay shapers for most of this initial
I-
stage then.
I kind of prefer to, yeah. And that's because it does have a little bit of a give to it, and I tend to be kind of, heavy-handed whenever I'm sculpting stuff. And kind of what that facilitates is, in order to smooth out a surface, you can actually, brush across it like you would be, painting on it.
Yeah.
So you can just, smooth out, sections of the, the surface of the model, or if you wanted to move something, for example, and I don't know how close you're going to be able to see any of this, but if I want to move something from one area to another, I can actually just push it a little bit, with the clay shaper, and then, kind of smooth it back out.
Yeah.
And then, or work in, definition of some kind and that sort of thing. And so it doesn't tend to leave as stark of a tool mark on the surface of the sculpt, because the tool is softer than, like one of the steel tools. So, but I mean, it just really depends on the sculpt and the size of it. if I'm working on a larger piece that's like a monster, or I'm trying to block out a pretty big area, then I'll go to this like a stainless. This is kind of a rounded tool, and it's called a spoon-shaped putty tool, I think, from Micromark, and it's got this rounded sort of tapered end on it, and so I'll take and work out, like if there's two pieces of material that I've wanted to put together, like I've added something onto it, then I can take and sort of smooth that out. And so here, I'm going to kind of fill out the volumes on her forelegs, because she's kind of taken a step there, so I want to make sure that I've got enough muscle, or enough sculpting material on there in order to block out, where I want her musculature to go. And there's also going to be a fur texture on here too. So, like for example, if she had like a big ruff, like if she was a wolf or something like that, and there was like around where her neck was going to go, there would be a full mane or like a ruff or something like that. I would build up that full volume around where her neck would be at that point, and then once I got all of the shapes smoothed out and surfaced, for the overall volume, then I would go back and take, one of my steel tools or something like that, and then work the texture of the fur and stuff into that volume just in that area. But like with this, when I'm done blocking her out, she'll have, a slight fur texture, kind of all over her. But the areas where the fur may be thicker or something like that, I'll want to build up those volumes with more material so the fur will look, puffy or whatever, and then just work kind of a light texture just into the surface of it. So when I had first started doing critters, and I was doing fur texture, I put like really severe fur strokes and stuff into it, and it didn't look right because it was really heavy-handed looking, and you can see that it was textured with the tools, so it would leave these tool marks and stuff in there. So take a look at that. I'll kind of show you where I've gotten to at this point with it. We'll take a look. Let's see. Oh, come on, focus.
There you go.
Yeah. So you can see that the forms, are starting to fill out more than just, just from where the armature was before. So that'll continue until I get it into the links shape that I'm looking for, and then once all of that's built out, then I'll start going back and putting the fur texture into it and all that. So like with this kind of a critter, I'll tend to do that kind of all in one go, as it were. So I won't really need to do, a pre or work it up to a stage and then bake it and then come back and work more on it. Unless I wind up having to do that with her ears, because the lynx has these little tufts that come off the top of the ears that kind of stand up, and I know that's going to be kind of tricky for molding and casting and stuff, so I may wind up having to reinforce that so that it'll work right, to get it cast correctly. So that may require a little bit of engineering. But anyway, so that's kind of how that works up, and then eventually it'll have a fur texture on it, like Chad's German Shepherd that he did for us. So you can see that's got a nice texture on it that would paint up really well for that character. So. And then here's my little sea creature that I'm working on. She was going to be a stretch goal also for the Babes Kickstarter. So if I can get her done, a little bit later this weekend, then we'll put her out there as a future stretch goal if we get past the ones that they're currently working on. So I'll be posting work in progress pictures of these after the weekend for her and the Forge Maiden of the orc character. But like at this point, so I've blocked out her basic anatomy, from the pose, and once all of this is kind of smoothed out, I still need to put material on there for her arms and work up the musculature for her shoulders and forearms and all that sort of thing. So this is about halfway through this, kind of at this point. And then once all of those volumes are worked out, the anatomy and everything is pretty much where I want it to go, then I'll go back and work the surface over it with a couple of different techniques. One of them is I use these are oiler tips, and what they are is it's kind of a syringe tip that's blunt. It's kind of flat across the end, and I don't know if you can see any of that, but yeah, there we go.
Yes.
Right. So, and they come in different sizes, and you can get them. There's a resource on actually my webpage. I think you can get them from Contente and Rio Grande and some other like jewelry casting houses. Have these, and it's called an oiler or lubricator tip, and it's since there's different sizes of it, you can make rivets or anything. You need a circular impression in the material. And so what I've been doing with them is, and it's kind of tricky, but if you hold it at an angle and lift a little bit, you can actually get a really cool kind of a scale pattern, to the surface of what you're doing. So if you want to do dragon scales or snakes or even scale mail armor, I guess, or fish or something like that, then this technique is really handy, for that. But you gotta do each one, and work around, like you've got to come around the perimeter, So I try to do it in rows, time to kind of keep it. And so it's like chainmail in that regard. You just kind of have to do a row and then go back and do the other row and that sort of thing, and alternate them and overlap. But it's that's kind of a really fun technique, and I've used that for feathers and stuff on bird characters too, and it works really well for that because the edge lifts up, and then once it's baked, the casting comes out really nice with a little edge to each one of the feathers that makes it really easy to highlight, and so it paints up pretty quick. But so that's one of the things that I use, and then there's like another material that I have that's like a sponge, and this is like a porous kind of sponge material, and I think it was used for like insulating machinery that sits on a workbench or whatever you would put this down. It came with an adhesive on one side, like a double-sided tape, and you tape that down and then put your bench machinery or whatever on it, and it keeps it from vibrating. Yeah. So I got this from another sculptor, and I don't know where to get any more of it. So there's a couple of different foam manufacturing places that are local here, and I was going to take this swatch to them and see if they could get me, some more samples. But basically, you just press this into the material, and then it comes out with this really cool kind of, pebbly texture. And so that makes great lizard scales or, fish scales or barnacles or, pretty much anything. I've used it for making bases. So there's like a rock texture and, all that kind of thing. So. And so I'll use a combination of those techniques or whatever for my fish girl to put texture and stuff on her in different places, and then probably work out some fins and some things on her. So I'll be doing that next. But let's see. Yeah, I think we've got about 10 more minutes that we're going to have, on the Hangout here. So if there's any other questions or anything that you guys have, we can certainly talk about that. Or if there's anything that you want me to show you, I can do that too. Let's see. Yeah, here's another piece that's also part of the Kickstarter project. Let's see if we can get her to focus. She's not going to do it. It's not going to do it. There we go. Yeah. So this is the Marion the cleric figure, and I had to kind of alter the pose a little bit from what it was in the artwork that was shown, just in order to get, to make her a little bit more stable, because I think in the art she's on one foot and leaning forward, and that's going to be pretty precarious, So I went ahead and put her back foot connecting to the base there, and then she'll have a tab for the slot base. But the technique that I wanted to use for the sensor that she has, because there she is. There's a little shot of the actual art. So she's got kind of this flail apparatus, I guess, that she's swinging around, and it's actually kind of a sensor because there's smoke coming out of it. And what I think I'm going to do with that is a technique that I've used on some other figures, where I use actual miniature chain, and then I fill it with a 2-part epoxy, and then shape it, into the pose that I want the chain to go, and then let that cure, and it kind of fills in between the links. And it makes it rigid, but then you can mold it. There's no undercuts or whatever that would cause problems with molding, because it kind of fills that in. But it actually looks like chain, and all the links are uniform and all that sort of thing. And so you can paint it up, and it looks like it's supposed to. So that's a technique that I want to use for for making this chain and everything. And then I'll sculpt the handle and the end on each one of those, and then reattach it on here. The wire that I have on the armature right here is just temporary, just so that I can show work in progress pictures that it's like, well, here's where it's going to go, once it's done.
So you don't end up with things like hairstyles going where you're eventually going to need a... Yeah,
right. It tells me, where it's going to take up the space there. Yeah, so it's just kind of a stand-in at this point. And that's another process that I kind of do. Different sculptors have different methods of how they like to do stuff, and I tend to make all of my props and weapons and anything that a character is going to be holding or carrying or whatever, I'll tend to make that as a separate piece. And then I'll attach that towards the end of the sculpt, unless it needs to really be integrated somehow. And so, for example, like her bow, so like her bow is a separate piece right now, and then I'll attach that onto...
Go in when you do a hand.
Yeah, I'll put it on her hand, and then once it's attached and that's cured and I know it's pretty secure, I'll go back and sculpt the hand around that where she's holding it. Because the way that I'm going to engineer this piece, once it's finished after looking at the art, she's got this really prominent shoulder pad over her shoulder, and rather than, because it's a gaming piece and I want to make sure that it's secure, the option that I would have is I could either, take the hand off and have just the hand attached to the bow, but since it's kind of on a perpendicular plane anyway to where her arm is posed, then what I can actually do is I can permanently attach her arm or her hand to where the bow is, and then take this whole arm off at the shoulder as a separate piece, because it'll be covered up by the shoulder pad. So the connection point in there is a lot more secure than it would be just putting a bow into the wrist, after the fact. And so I think, painters and gamers and so forth that are going to be using this model would appreciate that, you know, because that it'll keep the bow, you know, from coming off, you know, during gameplay or whatever. Yeah. So it's a lot more secure of a connection point from there. So that's another consideration that, you know, I usually have to take into account whenever I'm looking at, you know, how I'm going to approach, you know, doing a sculpt. And sometimes if I know ahead of time, like, for example, one of these arms is going to come off, you know, at the shoulder or at the elbow or something like that, I'll go ahead and cut that and then putty it back together so that when I cut into it after the sculpt is done, I'm not having to saw through the wire or whatever, because that'll cause damage to the sculpt or unwanted cracks or, you know, that kind of thing. So I try to head some of that stuff off as early in setting up the figure as I can, because it makes it easier and less work to have to go back and patch and touch up, you know, once I go in to cut it apart. So.
So what putty do you use for sticking together the pieces in the meantime?
Mainly for the assembly that I do for the armatures and so forth, I use the two-part epoxy putty that's like green stuff, but it's called Procreate. And it's made in the States by a company called Craftmark. And I will probably put links to, you know, all of the materials and the tools and so forth that I use in the Hangout today. So
yeah,
you can always.
I use the same.
Oh, you have that too?
Yeah, you told that. Sorry, English is not my first language.
That's okay. You sound great.
When you cut it, the wire armature, you put the things with putty. You use just regular putty, or you use something different to get the pieces together?
No, actually, it's just the Procreate.
Okay.
So for example, like if this character, for whatever reason, if I would need to make her with a separate arm here, what I would do is before I start sculpting on this armature, I would go ahead and cut the arm there, and then just reattach the wire back with just the Procreate. You know, put a little on each side and then stick it together, and let that cure. And then I would go and do all of my sculpting over that, knowing that, okay, well, I'm going to go back later after the figure is finished and then cut that arm through there. So that way the wire is already pre-cut. And, you know, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes I don't know where I'm going to have to cut it, and I wind up having to cut through the wire anyway. But as much of it as I can plan out ahead of time, then I try to do that. So did that answer your question? Was that what you were asking?
Yes, thank you.
Sure.
Cheers for all that, Patrick. I'm going to have to go, but thank you very much for the show.
Oh, well, great. Well, thanks for popping in, Anthony, and keeping me company. I certainly do appreciate it, and thanks for your support on the Kickstarter project.
Not at all. Not at all.
All right, cheers. All right, let's see. We've got just a couple more minutes before I'm going to have to wrap up. At this point, so I've got all of these, you know, work in progress pieces, and you were asking about, you know, cutting the models, and you know where that would go. For example, like this one, I know that from the art, like her arm, and I don't know how much of that you can actually see if it'll focus on it, but so like you can see on her right arm, I guess that's going to come across, you know, where her bosom is. All I've done is I've just blocked it out up to where her elbow is going to go. So then, you know, once I finish detailing all of the areas or whatever on her coat and do the chainmail and stuff on this sleeve and everything, and then I bake that, then I'm going to come back later and then sculpt the arm separately on there, because I know that that arm that's going across her chest here is going to have to come off and be a separate piece. So the material itself will be kind of sturdy enough for it to kind of be its own armature, so I don't really have to run wire across there, because I know it's going to be laying against her body as I'm sculpting on it. So in that way, that particular arm would be in relief. Then once that part's done, I can just go in and take the, you know, the knife and then pop that part off and then key it together so that it fits back together.
So
and
that was done in Beast Putty, or because you're telling me to bake it?
Yeah, this is all blocked out in Beast Putty right now. So at the beginning of it, we kind of went through. So like this particular armature, starts off as wire, okay, and then I've just basically glued it together with just Procreate. So the only thing that's holding it together here, where the wire is twisted together, and that the hips is all just Procreate, okay, and then I will pose that how the character is supposed to be posed, whether it's action or they're just standing there, and then, for example, then once that the armature is posed and attached to the cork, then I will go back and build up a layer of Procreate over that to sort of block out the basic understructure of it. And then this is what I'll sculpt over with Beast Putty. So, and I still use Procreate for sculpting faces, and I usually do all of my, when I sculpt faces, I have like a little brass wire that I put these blobs of putty on the end, and then basically I'll just put that into pin vise, and then I'll add my Procreate on there, and then sculpt the face and so forth into that. Then once the face itself is cured, I can cut it off there and attach it to the armature, where this extra, the neck wire is. I'll just putty it onto that, and that way it allows me to, if I'm sculpting, say for example, if I was working on this face and I was trying to get here, I would have difficulty getting into this area because her arm is sticking out. So it might be difficult for me to sculpt the face correctly if I have this arm in the way. So that's one of the reasons why I sculpt the head separately, because I have access to wherever I need to put the tool in order to sculpt the face as it needs to be. And then the second reason, I can, when I put the face on the armature, I can pose it and turn the head and orient it so that it's looking the direction that the character needs to be looking for the correct pose. And so I can adjust it if I need to, so that it's looking the correct way. If I had sculpted the face on this as it was, once it was finished and I looked at it, I might, realize, oh, well, it's not looking where I want it to look, and then I would have to go back and try to bend it, and it might break something or cause a problem. So through doing a lot of the sculpts and so forth, I've learned that for me it's easier just to do the head separately, and then I can attach it later. So some of these kind of wind up being model kits that way, where I do a lot of components, little separate pieces, and then before the sculpt is finished, I kind of assemble them all on there, like if it's a scabbard or a piece of equipment or something like that, and then sculpt whatever details I need after that. So.
Do you use cast parts for the sculpts too, for, I don't know, weapons or things like that?
I do. So, for example, this is an assistant blacksmith that I'm working on. That's an orc character. She's a female orc, I guess, blacksmith assistant. So I had sculpted this hammer for her that is part of another set, but I wanted to have her holding one, but I still needed to have one separate. So I cast this hammer in resin, and then as I'm working on the sculpt, I'll go ahead and attach that to her hand. And then once that's cured and set up, then I'll sculpt the details of her hand around it, so she'll be holding a copy of that hammer. And so that way I've got one that's done, and one that I can use for.
Do you make your own casts, or because I don't know if resin will resist the vulcanized process for doing the mold?
Oh yeah, it does. The resin that we're using is resilient. As a matter of fact, I can actually bake this resin. Like if I was using if I was using Beast Putty on this, I could actually bake that in the oven, and it would stand up to it. I mean, it would still be flexible until it cooled, but it would hold its shape to where I could even bake it in the oven. So I've actually had some of our resin pieces, vulcanized before, and they've come out fine without any problem. But yeah, I do. We do our own silicone molds. This I think is Maylee's. Yeah, this is the mold that I did for Maylee's tongs that are part of the forge set that's on the Kickstarter project. So, like for example, her tongs that she has that she's holding on her shoulders. That's a resin cast. So that way I can use, the original sculpt will be part of the forge set that we're going to have cast just on its own. But then now I can have her, holding a set also, so that gives me a duplicate to work with. And with this one, I knew, her glove is going to be cut here, and then this will all be a separate part. That'll be, I guess maybe sprued on here for casting. So, so that way you can mold it. But yeah, so I did that and cast up copies of that so I could have, iterations of it to use for her sculpt. Let's see, because where's the original part?
No.
Oh, yeah.
En mi casa tenía una mesa de dibujo donde me sentaba en una silla normal para que
And
me
there's-
llegara el pecho, para no tener que encolgarme.
No dolerte tanto.
Yeah.
Nice.
And there's the original that I cast. So, that also makes this kind of a thing possible too, because on the Babes3 project, I didn't realize that there was going to be a big dagger controversy over this particular figure. And
I'll go with the belt.
You go with the belt? Okay. So what that's allowed me to do is this character will be going to Resin Master just like this, for half of our backers, and then the other half that want the ones with the daggers on it, I will sculpt the daggers on it once it's been mastered, and then I'll have another master of it made, so we can have two versions of that particular character. And I think that was the best way to make everybody happy on it. So it worked out. But I think we're probably at the 1 hour mark, and I didn't really want to run beyond that. But so I'm going to wrap up and close down on our hangout from the workbench. But I certainly wanted to tell you, how much I appreciate you guys, stopping in and asking questions here, and keeping me company while I did our live broadcast, from the studio here. So, did you guys have any other questions, before we wrap up?
Not me.
Yeah.
Thank you for all the answers you gave me. Thank you.
Oh, sure. And I tend to be online on Facebook, and I'm on a couple of the hobby groups and stuff out there on Hobby Hangouts. I kind of lurk there and on our own Bombshell Facebook group and everything. And so if you're working on hobby stuff or you have questions, you can post those out on the group. And I usually try to be pretty quick with links, to where you can get information or, answers, where I can answer and give you the information that I have. So
Yes, that's
but
what
anyway.
I'm sculpting.
Oh, is this what you're doing? Okay, let's see. Wow, that's pretty awesome. That's a big guy. How big is he?
I believe it's 32 millimeters to the eyes.
Oh, okay. Man, that looks nice. Is that for a particular company, or is it just?
Ganesha Games
Ganesha.
asked me, but clearly I don't have all the experience you have. But
Well, it looks terrific. So I
Thank
think
you.
that's great work. So
yes, and I live in a country that there's no one else that does these kind of things. So it's kind of hard to ask someone to, hey, why you do this, or what materials are you using, and things like that. So I appreciate all this online help.
Well, great. I'm glad that you were able to pop in and get some tips to help you out. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that turns out.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks a lot. All right, well, that's going to be it for me, and I appreciate everybody, taking a look at that. And if you have a chance to go by and check out the Babes3 project, we would certainly appreciate any support that you can offer. And we're looking forward to putting out more Babes for you in the future. So hopefully, as I can find time, I'll try to do a couple more of these sessions from the workbench and kind of show you what I'm working on here at the Bombshell studio, and try to put out some more information if we can. All right, we'll see you later. Thanks.